Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, December 11th, 2018. Let's do a show. I don't know. I haven't got much more to say than that. Time for us to get rolling on things. There's plenty to pick up on. Once again, another one of those days, an embarrassment of riches. But Daily Co's Radio is live now, and one of those riches will be, of course, passing on to you Bill's tweet from Portland, Maine, all the way from Portland, Maine, as he does almost every morning. Thank you very much for being such a loyal listener, Bill. We appreciate it. Daily Co's Radio is live now. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman, reminds you that if you're listening through your dental fillings, and you may be, this week's signal comes through your back left bottom molar. Do not adjust your back left bottom molar. This is the actual radio signal. All right, thanks very much. And boy, it's indicative. I think Bill's feeling it too. You never know what the hell this show is going to have to be about, given how crazy and chaotic our chaos POTUS wants things to be. All right, well, plenty to kick off with today, as I mentioned. I guess the news in the news biz this morning. Time Magazine, to no one's surprise, chooses Khashoggi and other journalists who have been imprisoned, murdered, disappeared, or otherwise maltreated to the extreme by their local governments, or wherever they happen to be covering the happenings, are the person/persons of the year. I keep thinking Time Magazine, well, I guess it's understandable. As they've ceded relevance, they've had to cast their net wider, I think, and be more inclusive, which is a good thing for their Person of the Year selection, and they can't just land on one. And it wouldn't be right, of course, in this particular instance, to simply pick Jamal Khashoggi, as horrible as what happened to him is. It's a poignant reminder of how endangered, very often, journalists can be all around the world, but we'll note that one for the record. And I think appropriately what we'll do here is grab the NBC News reporting of what Time Magazine is up to. I guess we could do that. Why not? And we'll use that for our marker for the day when it comes time to link everything. Oh, probably should make sure all of the various noise-making equipment are properly set and volume shut down on these things so we don't get interrupted by any auto-playing video, at least not to our knowledge. Anyway, much more to cast around with here. There's an awful lot going on. Maria Butina, back in the news. She was in the news yesterday when the news broke that she was going to be cooperating with prosecutors. She's changing her plea. Apparently, her next court appearance now set for tomorrow. I think it was 3:15 p.m. Eastern Time. Well, she'll change her not guilty plea to a guilty plea. Indications are, and all you can really say is that indications are that she is signaling that she will be cooperating with prosecutors, which ordinarily is a good thing to hear from people who are charged with serious crimes. And I'm glad that, well, we all know what this means, is that people here in the United States who really deserve punishment for their treason might be caught up in the web of the things that she's willing to confess to. My concern is that we don't know exactly what that means. I have grabbed the tweet here and retweeted the tweet of Betsy Woodruff, Daily Beast reporter, who has this to say and points to the Daily Beast's reporting on the Butina case. Their headline, or at least the headline on their tweet, and sometimes there's a disagreement as between what shows up or stays up in the actual posting on the Daily Beast website or any other publication for that matter. Maria Butina pleads guilty. She hasn't yet. She's going to. Agrees to cooperate with U.S. I guess we might as well just open up that piece. They've kept the headline, so that's good news. It is Betsy Woodruff's own piece. Butina has inked an agreement with prosecutors and becomes the first Russian since the 2016 election to confess to a crime connected to efforts to influence American politics. And I guess that's where my concern arises. Betsy tweeting, FYI, in case there's any confusion, and there is, Maria Butina has agreed to, and she encloses this in asterisks here, fully cooperate, no holds barred. And I guess my only confusion about that is, what does it mean when somebody you say is a Russian spy, a Russian operative, says, oh yeah, I'll cooperate fully with American authorities, especially given, I mean, we have to pause and wonder, what are American authorities, actually? What does that mean? She's being, I presume, tried by the Justice Department, which may or may not be an actual Justice Department, may or may not be independent of the executive in this case. And in this case, of course, the executive is suspected of, well, being a Russian operative or spy in many ways himself. So I'm not really sure what it means. I mean, to date, they have put people in jail independent of, I'm sure Donald Trump would rather see them walk free, and maybe that's his ultimate plan for them. He may be thinking of exercising the pardon power. I don't think there's any indication that he's interested in using it for Maria Butina, but who knows, depending, I guess, on who's tied up in what that she has to talk about. But even absent all of that, before we even get to that, what does it mean for a Russian spy to say, you know what, I recognize American authority over me, and I'm just going to cooperate to make things easier for myself? I'm not, and you know, then I guess the next level after that is, what was my mission again? Oh, disinformation? Yeah, all right. So what are we going to get out of this person? Not exactly. I'm not sure. It's a deal you should make, I guess. And if she's willing to lie or mislead and hang our administration out to dry, I guess I'd be okay with that, because they're guilty of enough things that I wouldn't mind seeing them sent up the river, quite honestly, at this point, even on questionable charges. But hopefully, you know, for our own sake, we would think this through and make sure that everything is rock solid. Maybe she is cooperating, maybe she's not. I'm not too excited about finding out that a Russian disinformation officer has agreed to give us information in an important case. It serves the end of Russian disinformation missions to see us in chaos with our, you know, whether it's our president in prison, whether he deserves it or not. I think would be probably put a big smile on their faces. I think Putin has gotten anything that he really wanted to get or thought he would successfully get out of an idiot like Donald Trump. I'm sure he'd love to continue to control the presidency, but it's questionable whether Donald Trump is in control of the presidency. I mean, none of the things that Trump wants to get done are getting done, except for creating a lot of problems and a lot of chaos and a lot of tension, and keeping us preoccupied with those things instead of projecting American power abroad. So I'm sure that's a success for him. But anyway, that's my concern, is I'm not 100% sure that it's, worth a great deal to have her cooperation. We're just going to have to tread carefully. All right. We can do that. It's better to have her talk than not, I guess. And we'll see what we can piece together based on that. Here's what, let's see, what else? Is there a lot of good stuff here? Yeah, it's not all that long. Let's at least read through Betsy's piece here. If we're going to stand here and say, oh, Betsy, you're being too credulous here, might as well give her the credit of at least reading what she's reported. Maria Butina, a Russian national who cultivated relationships with powerful American conservative activists. Ooh, and I saw a good thread yesterday. I can't even make it through the first paragraph. I'm terrible at this. Saw a good thread yesterday, and I think it was, I'll have to keep scrolling back here. But great thread of all the Republican operatives and politicians, etc. Shannon Watts actually tweeted it around, who had their pictures taken, that she could find, who had their pictures taken with Maria Butina. We'll get back to that in a minute. Yeah, but it was Shannon Watts of Mom's Demand / Everytown. So she's, of course, particularly interested in the NRA angle on that. But anyway, Maria Butina, the Russian national who cultivated relationships with powerful American conservative activists, agreed yesterday, to plead guilty to conspiring to violate laws prohibiting covert foreign agents. It's a good thing to outlaw if you can. As part of her agreement, which was reviewed by the Daily Beast. She has promised to cooperate with American law enforcement. As a result of the deal, Butina will become the first Russian national since the 2016 election to plead guilty to a crime connected to efforts to influence American politics. After running a gun rights organization in Russia, she moved to the United States, where she spent years building relationships with conservatives in hopes of influencing a future Republican presidential administration. During the campaign season, she questioned then-candidate Donald Trump about sanctions, built relationships in the upper echelons of the American gun rights community, arranged for NRA leaders to travel to Moscow, and bragged that she was a channel between Team Trump and the Kremlin, as the Daily Beast first revealed. Just looking back at that first assertion there, remember that she questioned then-candidate Donald Trump. She stood up in a press conference and asked him a question. Basically, the first question, remember she was here to deal with gun rights, but the question she asked him is, are you going to lift the sanctions, basically? So I thought that was interesting. One of the first times that Trump as a candidate responded to or even took the question of a foreign correspondent, as far as I'm aware anyway, and it was a spy asking him if he would drop the sanctions. That's a pretty good sign. Anyway, she also struck up a romance, that's nice, with Paul Erickson, a longtime Republican gadfly close to NRA leaders. He sang Disney songs with her on camera, called her his Siberian princess in emails reviewed by the Daily Beast, and since her July arrest has visited her regularly in jail. In March 2015, according to the plea deal, Butina worked with an unnamed U.S. person, known now to be Erickson, to draft a proposal for a diplomatic endeavor. Given the fraught relationships between the governments of Russia and the United States, she, quote, cast herself as a possible unofficial transmitter of communications, unquote, between the two countries. Noting that she had recently attended the conference of an unnamed gun rights group, known to be the NRA, she said she had, quote, laid the groundwork for an unofficial channel of communication with the next U.S. administration, unquote, which she predicted would be a Republican, or be Republican. She asked for a Russian billionaire to give her $125,000 to fund efforts to attend conferences and befriend political power brokers. By the way, would anyone like to give me $125,000 to attend conferences and befriend political power brokers? I'm terrible at that. But, and actually I'm not all that good at attending conferences. But you know, so what? I mean, basically at this point, why, who cares? Why should I be worried about performance in exchange for my money? Nothing matters. She sent the proposal to several people, as I'm doing right now, including an official on the Russian central bank known to be Alexander Torshin. The central bank official told her the proposal, quote, would be supported, at least in part. All right, aim high. Maybe she only needed 100,000 or something like that. Butina helped arrange a trip to Moscow for NRA leaders in December of 2015. She pushed for those Americans to visit with senior Russian politicians, according to the plea deal. The Americans on the trip met with Sergei Lavrov, Russia's powerful Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Dmitry Rogozin, a deputy of Vladimir Putin and a subject of U.S. sanctions. After the trip, Butina sent a message to the central bank official in Russian that has 2 translations in the plea agreement. How interesting. I guess they'll provide them both. The first translation, and this is an interesting thing about it, translating documents. I guess things can be translated different ways. Probably true in a lot of cases. The first one is, we should let them express their gratitude now. We will put pressure on them quietly later, reads the first translation. The second says, we should allow them to express their gratitude now and then quietly press, reads the second. Interesting. Very subtle, but okay. I see the difference. Sort of. Maybe not. Butina also befriended a wealthy, well-connected American who invited her to a friendship dinner where he and his peers would discuss U.S.-Russia relations. The deal does not name that American. Before going to the dinner, she emailed its host to say Torshin, quote, is very impressed by you and expresses his great appreciation for what you are doing to restore the relations between the two countries. He also wants you to know that Russians will support the efforts from our side, unquote. Butina attended several of these friendship dinners, according to the plea deal, where she built relationships with powerful Americans and honed her abilities to influence them. She also helped arrange for a group of Russians to attend the National Prayer Breakfast. That was interesting to us when we read about that. That was held on February 2nd, 2017, according to the plea deal. She emailed Erickson with a list of attendees and said they were coming to the breakfast, quote, to establish a back channel of communication, unquote, just like Jared Kushner wanted. Erickson later emailed the list to another person. Reaction to the delegation's presence in America will be conveyed directly, in all caps, unquote, to Russian President Vladimir Putin and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, he wrote. He CC'd Butina on that email, and during her time in the U.S., Butina updated Torshin on her meetings and conversations. At one point, she asked him whether the Russian government was ready to meet with certain unnamed people. In July of this year, Butina was arrested and charged on 2 counts, acting as a covert agent of a foreign government and conspiring to break federal law by doing so. The specific charge for acting as a foreign agent is colloquially known as Section 951. It's often confused with the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA, but the two are separate. FARA bars secret foreign lobbying, while DOJ lawyers refer to Section 951 as espionage light. She has only pleaded guilty to the second count, conspiracy. I think that's somewhat important. I don't know if I understand it necessarily. I'll have to give that some thought, but okay. The defense's estimated sentence for this conviction, according to the plea deal, is up to 6 months. She's already spent almost 5 months in jail. So she may get time served, if that's all there is, in terms of convictions. Butina, who turned 30 while incarcerated, that's fun, at the Alexandria Detention Center just south of Washington, has become a figure of geopolitical consequence and international intrigue. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs Twitter account made her picture its avatar along with the hashtag Free Maria Butina. They claimed she was a political prisoner and a victim of Russophobia. Some Americans, including Kentucky Republican Representative Thomas Massey, gave credence to that view. Earlier this week, the Daily Beast reported Erickson has received a, quote, target letter. It's not like a quote. That's what they call it, a target letter from federal investigators, which says they are considering bringing charges against him under Section 951 as well, the law barring people from secretly acting as agents of foreign governments. Butina once hobnobbed with the stars of the Republican firmament, getting pictures of herself with Governor Scott Walker, Donald Trump Jr., NRA Chief Wayne LaPierre, former Governor Bobby Jindal, who says we have to stop being the stupid party, former Senator Rick Santorum, oh my, and former NRA President David Keene. I only bring up Santorum for special mention because, in another story we might spend some time on, the continuing search for a chief of staff for the White House includes, apparently, a glance at Rick Santorum. I think the timing is fantastic for Rick to have these pictures of him coming out with Butina. Nothing like making the unwitting, perhaps, friend of a notorious spy your White House chief of staff. Hasn't been a move as blatantly stupid since Mike Flynn. But okay, you can do it, Donald Trump. I believe in you. On July 11th, 2015, Butina was in Las Vegas at an early rally for Trump's embryonic presidential campaign and asked the future president a question about Russian sanctions. Trump giving a surprisingly detailed answer. I didn't think so, to be honest. I thought it was typically evasive. I mean, it went on for some time. Many words were spoken. It wasn't a detailed answer about the question that was asked, I don't think. But okay, whatever. A year and a half later, she attended the invitation-only Freedom Ball after Trump's inauguration. In jail, the quasi-glamour of Washington turned into a nightmare. Like thousands of incarcerated Americans, she struggled with depression and claustrophobia, according to court filings, not Fort Kylings, but court filings from her lawyers, who say that jail officials never clearly explained why they placed her in solitary confinement for a second stint that began late last month. she was still in solitary when she signed the plea deal. I'm always confused about solitary confinement. I'm not certain under what circumstances they can absolutely, I think it's just a policy matter, and there's some discretion as to whether they keep people in solitary confinement. But I know it's supposed to be terrible, and it breaks people. Although, I mean, not having been in it, I guess I'm thinking if I'm in prison, first of all, that sucks. Second of all, though, I guess I'd say one of the things I would really like to avoid while in prison is other prisoners. And solitary confinement from the outside sounds great. I mean, if you got to be in prison, like, really? I got to be in prison, but you're going to keep me away from everybody? This might be really better than you think. But, apparently the psychological toll of literally being in solitary confinement. I mean, I like being solitary, but confinement sucks. And being on your own completely for days on end, weeks on end, can take a real toll. I guess I'm just used to it. Most of my days are pretty solitary as it is. And so I flippantly say, well, I guess if I'm in prison, I'd rather be on my own. I don't know. All indications are to the contrary, and that it is a terrible thing. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there. As part of her deal, she has committed to cooperating with American law enforcement in any and all to matters. All right, that's what it says. In any and all really should mean matters, as to which the government deems this cooperation relevant. Which just seems to me like, okay, you're set up for failure on this, and that might be the best deal you can negotiate. You can't obviously negotiate a cooperation deal that says, and if I don't cooperate, nothing happens. But, so sign that, fine, and she'll probably not cooperate all that much. Her future is hazy. She may be welcomed in her home country as a celebrity, as a spy named Anna Chapman was. I'm glad there was a mention of Anna Chapman right in the piece here. I like that. After she was deported from the U.S. in 2010. But Butina could also face a darker homecoming. By the time she returns, if she keeps the deal, she may have spent hours sharing information with the FBI, and Torshin has left his central bank post, meaning her closest ally has lost most of his power. Without Butina, Erickson's future looks rough. He remains a target of the feds, and sources close to him tell the Daily Beast he's struggling to keep up with his legal bills. I wonder if he was better able to keep up with them when he was able to get, more access to Maria, who was getting chunks of $125,000 from Russian central bank leaders. I don't know. Curious to find out how the money flowed in that relationship. All right. Well, that's interesting to know. Again, not too sure what she, can do by way of cooperation. There's some comments on this. Michael Musson saying Alexander Torshin, Butina's boss or controller, disappeared in Russia in the last few days too. Connected? I would say so. I didn't realize that was the case. It didn't say that in the article. It just said, well, he's left his central bank position. So you must have had a laugh about that one after you made your comment. Like, oh really? Has he left his central bank post for a post in a spider hole or a shallow grave or what exactly? Yeah, I would say that's probably connected. Would she be welcomed back to Russia? Yeah, probably. I mean, initially, no matter what happens here, I assume to save face, they welcome her back and sneer and make it look like they pulled one over on the United States, even if she gave everything up. And then she ends up in a shallow grave later on. And, who mourns her? We don't mourn her here in the United States, and they don't mourn her there. So my guess is if she ever gets out of prison, best thing for her to do is run away somewhere, anywhere. I don't know where she thinks she can go and not be found by the Russians, but good luck to you if you want to do that. Unless, of course, you've screwed us over totally. And in that case, good, I hope the Russians find you. I don't know what to say about this. It's very confusing, and it's meant to be. It's espionage. It's not meant for us to keep up with. Matt Hatter has a comment, too. Maybe she has the goods on the NRA or gives narrative to collected evidence that Mueller has in hand. But yes, don't trust Butina at face value. I mean, that's all you can say. I think a very sensible comment. you're not that mad at all, Hatter. I think that sounds pretty reasonable. It's very likely that she could plant some garbage, and, maybe we should just be prepared to use that as necessary. And, if it turns out to be disinformation but puts people away that need to be put away, fine. We'll wink and lock them up. All right, let's see. Another branch, I guess just before we break off here, another branch of the Russia angle that I'm also not super convinced by here. And it's too bad because it would hang Mitch McConnell out to dry. Norm Ornstein retweeting this at the moment, saying, let us never forget that Mitch McConnell, blackmailed Obama and the intelligence chiefs to keep the story of Russian interference in our election from going public with a bipartisan statement. We haven't forgotten that, and neither should you, and I'm sure that you haven't. Although in the last couple of days I've been seeing this come back up in this context. It's attached to the tweet of Sherry Jacobus, the, former Republican operative who kind of went the never Trump way, and it appears to have stuck by it as well. She was tweeting here, Mitch McConnell received $3,500,000, I guess, I don't know what, over the course of how long, from a Ukrainian-born oligarch with ties that lead to Russia's Vladimir Putin. And this has been much discussed in the last couple of days. This one troubles me, of course, because we keep just referring to the guy as Ukrainian-born, and he is. And that's, this is one of the issues that makes all this stuff so murky. He's an American citizen now. This is one of these things that, I guess, according to the current state of the law, you just can't do anything about. But I assume that, it feels like this was something that they knew they could exploit at some point and just naturalize somebody. It's a long-term project, but it works. Then they can't nab them. We'll return to this after the break. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And, we should probably continue with this thread, because why not? I mean, at this point, it's all connected anyway. We'll get around to almost everything eventually. Let me address one other thing. Gideon has been commenting that, first question was, what did Butina do during the 2016 election? And it's only partially answered by the recollection that she showed up at that Las Vegas rally and asked the question about sanctions. And then, of course, I don't know what she was up to for most of the election time, except that she was laying the groundwork for communications between Putin-connected Russian operatives and semi-Trump-connected Republican and conservative and NRA operatives here in the United States, although we haven't heard much, or at least I don't think I certainly don't recall much in the way of specific election-related activity by Butina. She may have been just sort of, cultivating relationships at that point, as opposed to disseminating, participating in the active measures, as they call it. Although the NRA connection and the gun section of sector, I guess, of the electorate was very specifically targeted by the active measures side of the Russian manipulation game. That was a very big entry point, sort of a weak spot, a pressure point, I think, correctly identified by the Russians for manipulating American opinion and public thought. It's a great entryway for hyperbolic overhyping of one point or another, but also a great way of leveraging fracture points in American politics, whether that's from the right or the left. Quite honestly, you can always manipulate a pretty significant portion of the right by putting out disinformation or just straight up making up garbage. It doesn't even have to be disinformation. I think implies there was a certain art to it, finding a kernel of truth and twisting it. But I think they were pretty well aware in Russia, as most of us are, that you can make great inroads with a significant chunk of the electorate simply by throwing out the same thing over and over again, that the Democratic candidate for whatever office will take your guns. And that works for some people. It wouldn't be worth very much money, I don't think, from the Russians, but if you're the one person who's secured that job, then I suppose you could continue the money pipeline by continuing to be right about that. But you can also leverage from a portion of the left here by, for instance, saying, though there's a very strong right-wing bent to the gun rights advocacy wing of the American body politic, there's also rifts to be exploited elsewhere. For instance, feeding the right information or even disinformation. Honestly, you can do it with just correct information to the sector of the Black Lives Matter movement that would register very clearly and very personally the difference in the way white Americans, heavily armed in police presence, are treated, and black Americans unarmed, quite honestly. But if they happen to also be armed, so much the better from the police and right-wing standpoint, that they have justification for arresting, beating, shooting them. But you can absolutely exploit that rift too, if you're particularly sophisticated. I don't know whether Butina was doing that. It was sophisticated enough to do that. But good question as to what specifically she did. And maybe, I don't know whether I have not read or retained that information, or maybe it's just not out there, and we're going to get at that as her case moves forward. Also pointing out or questioning the idea that, well, what about this thing that you said, nothing Trump wants is happening. I thought he was able to send troops to the border. And that's true to a certain extent. And of course, it's not true across the board that nothing Trump wants is happening. Things that Trump wants to do are happening, and that's the big danger. But on major points, most of the things, for instance, on which he actually campaigned as major themes, they're not happening. Not that there isn't any danger of them happening, or danger of other things that he didn't talk about very much happening by the people he surrounds himself pulling the right levers in government. But my continuing thread on his various failures of why don't you just-ism is still looming out there, and that influences my thinking. The number of times that he's been rebuffed by courts or other authorities, or just, I don't know, just has failed to pull together his major projects. Of course, the border wall itself, which, as I understand it, the fact checkers over at the Washington Post have had to invent a new category. We're talking about the guys with the Pinocchios, the Pinocchio rating system, 1 through 4 Pinocchios, which was never enough, now have revamped their system to, well, they've included in their system the bottomless Pinocchio, which is a phrasing issue if you ask me. But never mind that. The bottomless Pinocchio for the class of lie in which Donald Trump deals most frequently, the one that is blatantly untrue and would ordinarily get you 4 Pinocchios. But the idea of giving somebody 4 Pinocchios in the Washington Post is to embarrass them into continuing to use that lie. But Donald Trump isn't moved by getting 4 Pinocchios in the Washington Post. That's not going to change his mind about anything. He doesn't care about that. He might even enjoy that and play off of it. So the bottomless Pinocchio for lies like, as they used in the example here, his repeated lie that the border wall construction has begun and has made significant progress, which apparently he repeated something like 86 times during the midterm elections here at various rallies and appearances and press conferences. And giving it 4 Pinocchios wasn't enough to do anything. It didn't make a dent in his head or his hair or whatever whatever part of him, designates his exoskeleton, however you conceive of it. But he just keeps telling it over and over again. So this is one of those things. Between that and his continued failure, the thread that I keep adding to every time he's defeated in court, in particular, and say you're really good at getting things done or whatever. #dotard. He keeps failing in these major endeavors. Yes, he was able to send troops to the border. And this is interesting. This is one of those things that I think maybe it didn't filter over to coverage that you saw in the UK. I mean, it's not wrong to say that he sent troops to the border, but being a little bit closer to it here, no fault of yours or anything. It's just we live here. And so we see news, and sometimes I just don't report on every single thing that happens. But from the outset, he basically declared his ability to send and interest in sending huge numbers of troops. And remember that at its peak, he was promising to send something like 15,000 troops to the border. And I think he managed at some point to send a head count of something near half that number. But the vast majority of those troops were PR troops, essentially. I mean, they were honestly, like PR units. They weren't combat units or anything like that. Not that there was any combat going on down there anyway. But between the PR units and the, of course, also a significant number of them were engineering units, which is a good addition if you really did want to build a barrier of some sort between the United States and Mexico. I guess you would want to have engineering units there too. But the sum total of their work appeared to have been stretching out what we're reminded is concertina wire, not barbed wire, but concertina wire, along places where there wasn't much threat of crossing the border anyway. The big photo op that we saw, because there were so many PR troops there, was the engineers stretching out concertina wire along the banks of the, I guess, presumably the Rio Grande, near where there was a highway overpass, crossing the Rio Grande. It was a major crossing point, and there's a big bridge. But I guess they figured, well, here up at the bridge, we'll check you with Border Patrol folks. And if you are afraid of them and you want to avoid them, you'll jump off the side of the bridge and walk down to the banks of the river and wade across there. And people do wade across the Rio Grande, but apparently just not there, because you'll be spotted from the road. You want to do this in an isolated area, I would think. But that's where they chose to put up the concertina wire. And then those guys had to camp out there along the border within sight of bustling activity, and lots of like fast food joints. They could see the lights of the fast food places that they all like, but they had to sit out there camping out in tents along the banks of this muddy river and putting up concertina wire and eating MREs, the meals ready to eat, field rations, what they call them these days, MRAs. And they were miserable and depressed and doing nothing, and they knew it. And since then, thousands of them have already been sent back home. So, yeah, he moved troops to the border, but they weren't allowed to do anything. Half of the ones who were sent have already gone back home. The other half are miserable, and it was only half of the number he said he was going to send in the first place. So about a quarter of what he was threatening, and none of them are allowed to do anything on the border. So not a tremendous success from my perspective. I don't know whether it's a success from his perspective or not, but what do we care? He's an idiot, and we don't listen to that guy. All right. So now back over to the McConnell issue. We are constantly reminded, and properly so, that Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan, though for some reason we hear about him to a lesser extent, probably because he's retiring in disgrace, another thread we could follow later on in the show. But we're constantly reminded of the incident in the run-up to the 2016 election. Once it had been made clear by the intelligence services to then President Barack Obama that the Russians were interfering in, or seeking to interfere in, I guess they were already interfering by that point, in the election through various means, Obama, thinking that Republican elected officials in Congress were patriotic Americans first, went to them and said, well, we've discovered this terrible thing, and don't you want to do something about it? And the answer from the Republican leadership mysteriously was, no, we do not want to do anything. Not only do we not want to do anything, if you try to do something without us, because that's how you'll have to do it, we will accuse you of partisan interference in the election, which is a rather extraordinary threat. And so anyway, at this point now, here in late 2018, this does keep coming up. And of course, it's quite proper to lay a significant portion of the blame on McConnell for saying, no, you can't tell the truth about what Russia is trying to do in the election, because if you do, we'll say you're interfering in the election and we will leverage partisan advantage out of that. And that was a rotten and unpatriotic and near treasonous thing to do. But I guess also, though, to be realistic, I guess you really have to think about, well, why did Barack Obama back off of that? Well, we're going to say that you're trying to interfere in a partisan way in the election. Yeah, you will say that. But you will probably say that anyway. You may already be saying that now. And I could fight that and say, no, I'm actually, protecting the national security of the United States. And I'm quite surprised that you're not only unwilling to do so, but joining in the attack. And maybe that isn't such a great thing for you in this election. Although, again, I don't know that anybody would have believed it. It was a risk. And they opted to go in the direction they did. Oh, well, we'll impose some sanctions, but we won't say anything, partisan about this, or something that could be interpreted as partisan. And I don't know whether that was a mistake or not, but it's worth noting. Anyway, in our consideration of McConnell's role, we are also reminded, in this case, what am I even looking at here? Was this this was the thing that Sherry Jacobus was tweeting about. She's led me to a publication I know nothing about, The Intellectualist, which worries me because that's a weird name for anything. However, I have no reason to doubt what Jake Thomas is reporting here. I wouldn't be surprised by this at all. McConnell received $3.5 million in campaign donations from Russian oligarch-linked firm. So what's the deal? We've heard the name before. We've actually called this name on the show months ago. Len Blavatnik donated $3.5 million to Mitch McConnell's PAC from 2015 to 2017. So it's over a period of years. Ukrainian-born billionaire Len Blavatnik, who holds dual U.S.-UK citizenship, used to be a fairly run-of-the-mill campaign contributor, donating relatively modest amounts in bipartisan fashion, and then the 2016 election cycle hit. Beginning in 2015, Blavatnik lavished contributions on Republicans, with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell alone on the receiving end of $3.5 million between 2015 and 2017. Via the Dallas News, we have this quote: Blavatnik contributed a total of $3.5 million to a PAC associated with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Blavatnik contributed $1.5 million to the GOP Senate Leadership Fund PAC in the name of Access Industries and another $1 million in the name of AI Altep Holdings during the 2015 and 16 election season. And as of September 2017, had contributed another $1 million this year through AI Altep. Blavatnik, whose family emigrated to the U.S. in the late 1970s, is a longtime business associate of Russian oligarchs Oleg Deripaska and Viktor Vekselberg, both of whom have ties to Russian President Vladimir Putin, along with McConnell. Senators Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham, both Republicans, of course, received hefty sums from Blavatnik as well. Linking to a full report in the Dallas News here. So, at any rate, there's links, so we at least have that. The problem, of course, that's posed by that is if the guy has U.S. citizenship, there's nothing wrong on the face of it with those donations, except, of course, if you're against big money and politics on principle, and you should be, then that will make you upset. But there's nothing illegal about that. Plus, of course, even the idea of, well, this is really just a long-term plot to, plant oligarchs in, with U.S. citizenship so that they can steer money. That's an awfully long developing play. He emigrated to the U.S. in the late 1970s, and I guess, that means he wouldn't have emigrated with billions of dollars stowed away that he stole off of, whatever, as a Russian oligarch. He left during the Soviet era. Maybe he made good while he was here. Maybe he made good with his ability to reconnect with Russian oligarchs and Ukrainian oligarchs post-Soviet era. And, but again, there's nothing particularly by itself wrong with that. And it may, in fact, be a long developing play. Although it may not have developed until the post-Soviet era when he realized, I can make lots of money because I can speak the language and I know some of the people and I'm willing to go out on a limb. And then he realized I'm making such good money and it's in cooperation with these oligarchs that maybe I am willing to or will find myself forced into getting into political cooperation with them. That's a possibility. But I don't know how much you're going to, you really have to rely on the aura of Russophobia to nail McConnell strictly on the basis of his having received an extraordinary amount of money from a person who used to live in Ukraine, but has been a U.S. citizenship for a number of years. It's suspicious that his pattern of giving has changed, but that's all it is. So that's circumstantial evidence, It's nothing wrong with circumstantial evidence. You can work with that. It's worth noting, but I wouldn't expect Mitch McConnell to land in jail for having received those donations. So it can certainly be good cause to look askance at him, but you already have plenty of reason to do that. All right. So let's see. What other issues shall we bring up? I mentioned a couple of other threads we could pursue here, but I have already forgotten them. So that's good news. That's par for the course. And so far our show's been pretty good for a couple of years, even though I continue to do that. Oh, yes, Viktor Vekselberg. I think he's the one that I've got a story on here. And, man, again, there's a million different directions to go in here. Let's just roll through a couple of them and scroll down a little bit. Somewhere in here, not too far down, I don't think, is a story I put away a couple of days ago that I think is about Vekselberg. Well, let's see. Here it is. We'll open it up. Yep. There it is. Interesting twist on things and maybe deflating some of the story. I'm not sure. Let's check it out. Putin's American, and that's in scare quotes, American oligarch privately boasted of Trump ties. Then he lost billions. That's sort of counterintuitive, eh? Bloomberg has got this piece, or had it, when? December 7th, a date that will live in infamy because of this article and because of the fact that I didn't read it that day. A chance New York encounter between one-time Trump lawyer Michael Cohen, you know that guy, and a relative of Viktor Vekselberg has cost the Russian dearly. It's always interesting to hear that they're losing money. Stephanie Baker, Yulia Fedorinova, I'm going to guess, and Irina Resnick, all on this December 7th piece, not long after Michael Cohen stopped pursuing a Trump-branded property project in Moscow, and that would have been like June 2016, right? Another Russian connection to the future U.S. president's entourage started to form. Like the real estate plan, it didn't end well, particularly for Russian tycoon Viktor Vekselberg. His effort to engage in statecraft at the highest level unraveled spectacularly, costing him billions, cleaving his family, and severing the extensive ties to the U.S. elite that turned him into what one Moscow newspaper called the most American of Vladimir Putin's plutocrats. I guess Blavatnik doesn't count. He's just fully American and maybe not one of Putin's own, I guess. This saga, much of it previously unreported, began with a chance encounter between Cohen, Trump's now disgraced former lawyer, and Vekselberg's American cousin, Andrew Intrater. We called him last time. We called his name a couple months ago. In the fall of 2016. We may already know this. Let's find out. Soon, Trump would be in the White House and Vekselberg would be privately boasting of having the pull needed to help achieve the sanctions relief the Kremlin was craving, people familiar with the matter said. Instead, he became the richest victim of the most dangerous standoff between U.S. and Russia since the Cold War. Let's see. Just happened to have pulled a note here from Armando, who has a link to, or the last thing I saw go by was a link to an Empty Wheel tweet. Let's see. I guess, so we'll see whether this is directly related to this or not, and see whether I have to weave it in. Okay. It might find its way into this, but a good point, and one we have passed on her behalf before, which is a reminder that the Trump Organization is not Donald Trump, and also therefore not the sitting president, which also means that you don't have to worry about whether or not the authority exists to indict the Trump Organization, which is something you can do. That's something she said back on the 1st of December. CNN reporting today how Michael Cohen could help the feds get the Trump Organization. So that will be worth looking in on, perhaps later on, or maybe as a follow-up to reading about Viktor Vekselberg. Definitely something to keep in mind along the way here, though. The story of Vekselberg's fall from grace in the U.S., where his American grandchildren, Yale-educated children, and wife all live, is based on interviews with more than a dozen people in the billionaire's orbit in both countries. The optimism about the future of bilateral relations that the one-time oil magnate expressed as recently as a year ago has given way to bouts of occasional public melancholy. This will happen when you lose billions of dollars, I guess. Through much of 2017, as the nascent Trump administration navigated controversies of its own making, Vekselberg was giving Russian officials and fellow businessmen vague yet certain assurances about his influence in the White House. According to 6 people who interacted with him at the time, he'd attended Trump's swearing-in ceremony in Washington as a guest of Intrater, who's donated $250,000 to the inaugural committee, and come back with a newfound sense of clout, they said. Again, he's able to, he's not himself an American citizen, Vekselberg, but he's able to use his connections to those family members who are to give a reasonably large amount of money to Trump World. Vekselberg's spokesman in Moscow, Andrei Stork, I guess is probably what it is. Andrei Stork said the billionaire never tried to be a go-between on the sanctions issue. Vekselberg has not and could not have offered anyone his help to resolve sanctions, he said by email late Thursday. He has no ability to do so. Not that he would necessarily admit that to others, but or that might just be a cover story. Shortly after being grilled in New York in March as part of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's election meddling probe, Vekselberg and the younger, brasher aluminum baron, they didn't call him a magnate, dang, Oleg Deripaska, were slapped with sanctions over Putin's malign activities. Vekselberg has since lost about $3 billion of his now $13.4 billion fortune. Oh, boo-hoo. Mainly due to declines in the market values of his minority stakes in Swiss industrial companies and Deripaska's Rusal. And that doesn't count the estimated $2 billion or more of stocks and cash that have been frozen or tied up in banks as a result of the U.S. penalties. The Treasury's decision in April to put Vekselberg in the same category as Deripaska stunned corporate Russia. That's because Vekselberg, unlike Deripaska, has never been particularly close to Putin and sold his main Russian asset 6 years ago, whereas Deripaska has been denied a U.S. visa for years over allegations of past criminal activity, which he rejects. Vekselberg has a long history of working with leading U.S. companies, institutions, and politicians on commercial and charitable projects. That's not how some U.S. intelligence and law enforcement agencies see it. Vekselberg has been on Washington's radar screen for years, having met the 3 previous U.S. presidents, Obama, W., and Bill Clinton, but not Trump. In 2010, he helped organize part of then-President Dmitry Medvedev's state visit, which included a 3-day tour of Silicon Valley, headlined by meetings with Apple's Steve Jobs, Google's Eric Schmidt, and Cisco's John Chambers. Coming up on our next break here, and we can decide whether we're going to continue with this particular article, but I guess we'll head into the break reading a little bit more about it. Vekselberg was deeply implicated in efforts to influence leaders and politicians here in the U.S., said Michael Carpenter, a former Pentagon official who oversaw Russia for the National Security Council in the Obama administration. That's why he wound up where he did. Okay, all very interesting. We'll have to scan over the next minute or so how long this goes on and whether we're going to learn much more or we need to move on to other things, because there is so much more. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's use this break then as an excuse to break off from this story. It is very interesting, and I recommend it to you for good background. I think, though, the thing I wanted to take away from the story is that at least one of the big names in, let's say, in Russia world that are at least connected to Trump world is, in fact, not making out like a bandit in this at all, or at least claims not to be, and may have some reason to regret the whole thing. So that's of interest. But then, of course, he's still sitting on $10 billion, so it can't disturb him all that much. But you never know. These guys, they're very weird about their money. Let's see. There was information down here about how did Vekselberg come into contact with Trump world, and there's a section down here. Intrater met Michael Cohen, by accident in a Midtown Manhattan restaurant in the fall of 2016, when a mutual friend introduced them. A person familiar with the matter said. I guess that's of interest all by itself. In early January 2017, after his $250,000 gift, but before Trump took office, Intrater escorted Vekselberg to Trump Tower in New York for an impromptu meeting with Cohen, according to 2 people with knowledge of the matter. How impromptu could it be? I don't know, if he's escorting him. There, Vekselberg and Cohen discussed, among other things, a desire to improve U.S.-Russia relations. Then, sometime in March, Trump's second full month in office, Vekselberg and Intrater met Cohen again in New York, this time to discuss a potential oil deal in the U.S. that never materialized, one of the people said, declining to be more specific, and therefore, in Donald Trump's mind, nothing could possibly be wrong with that, because it didn't happen. Stork said Vekselberg and Cohen met on 2 occasions, including one in which Cohen presented a potential investment opportunity that Vekselberg wasn't interested in. These interactions, well, this is, ass-covering stuff from Stork. On March 14th, Putin invited Vekselberg to the Kremlin for their first one-on-one meeting since 2010, according to Dmitry Peskov, the Russian president's spokesman. The main topic of discussion was Renova Group's infrastructure projects in Russia. If you believe that. All right, so, there's a bit more here. But, I guess really I would say this is reading to do at another time. Just it doesn't add that much to what we're getting today, and there's a lot more to get to. Let's take a look at what Armando had brought up in sending me the empty wheel tweet. One, a reminder, on the 1st of December, the Trump Organization is not the sitting president. I think that might be I don't know if that's that's the title of the post back then. The drive of the post summed up here at the top. In his sentencing memorandum submitted late last night, Michael Cohen, this was the first go-round on December 1st, laid out what investigations he has cooperated with so far. And then she reminds us, so that's the Mueller investigation, the open Southern District of New York investigation, possibly just the one on campaign finance violations Cohen pled to, possibly more. Third, New York State's Trump Foundation lawsuit. And number 4, another New York State investigation. And reminding us that I guess ultimately the upshot of all of this is, look, the Trump Organization is different from Donald Trump, and that's absolutely indictable. And she's just pointing out here, she said that on the 1st, and then today, the 11th, Eric Orden reports for CNN how Michael Cohen could help the feds get the Trump Organization, which is just to point out that, it's to point out the obvious, but it's certainly more obvious to us that now that Marcy had said so, and it was a good point when she said it, but I mean, it is also sort of obvious in this sense. Is the Trump Organization a different thing than the person Donald Trump? Yep. Okay. There you go. Well, sometimes we need to be reminded of that. Sometimes Donald Trump needs to be reminded of that. He doesn't make any distinction. The rest of us do, because we know, we understand like physics and stuff and the law to some extent. And even if you don't understand the law, I can assure you the law views it the same way you do naturally. There's his company, and then there's him, and they're different things. All right, let's see. Other things that we need to touch on. Let's see. Some of them are quick hits, like, for instance, this one that I saw noted by The Hill, which is a good point. Now it reminds me of what I wanted to get back to. Should I do this one first? No, why don't I save that one and go to the other story first? Another big deal in press circles anyway today. Can you believe it? It comes from Vox.com. And it's Ezra Klein writing what is sort of a mea culpa, which amounts to this. Oh my God, all of you stupid hippies were right about Paul Ryan all along. He's a con man and a fraud, and he isn't a budget wonk. He's an idiot, and he cost us dearly. And I'm sorry I took him seriously. I didn't take him as seriously as Republicans took him, but I took him too seriously. That's the upshot of this. Do we want to do it long form? Paul Ryan's long con. He betrayed his promises and left a legacy of debt and disappointment, says Ezra Klein. And let me do it this way. Long story short, Paul Ryan said he was a super budget genius and a total wonk, and reporters reported that unquestioningly for a long time. And what ended up happening, as Ezra points out, is during the years when he was in charge of everything, the deficit, which he campaigned on and on reducing, eliminating even, that his very seriously draconian budget proposals, which never went anywhere, and that's part of his problem, and part of Ezra's problem with him. Not that he supported his budgets, but that, if you say you're going to do this, you better do it, or else. I don't know why he's held to that standard at this point, but okay. Anyway, basically, he said he was a fiscal genius and he was going to reverse everything, even if it required horrific austerity measures. But then he didn't do any of them, and the national debt and each year's budget deficit skyrocketed. So exact opposite of everything he said he was for. So he wasn't even like partially successful. And yet everybody still, really almost until today, still walks around saying what a genius and serious budget wonk he is. Even as the dirty effing hippies of the world kept insisting he was a fraud. The very serious journalists kept insisting that maybe he wasn't. And now he is, and Ezra's here to say so. And I think he's got a pretty good turn of phrase about it somewhere down the line here, and maybe I can skim through it and find it. I probably should have highlighted it. First, though, I have to see if I can address the desperately whirring cooling fan that's making so much noise from my laptop here, but I don't think I'm going to be able to eliminate that entirely. All right, here's the deal. House Speaker Paul Ryan's legacy can be summed up in just one number, $343 billion. That's the increase between the deficit for fiscal year 2015 and fiscal year 2018. That is the difference between the fiscal year before Ryan became Speaker of the House and the fiscal year in which he retired. If the economy had fallen into recession between 2015 and 2018, Ryan's record would be understandable, but it didn't. In fact, growth quickened and the labor market tightened, which means deficits should have fallen. Indeed, that's exactly what happened in each of the 5 years preceding Ryan's speakership, 2011 to 2015, during which time annual deficits fell each year. Imagine that. Freedom Caucus. John Boehner was a far more effective speaker with respect to deficit reduction than Paul Ryan ever was. As he prepares to, I had to add that part, but that's basically implicit in what he's saying here. As he prepares to leave office, Ezra continues, Ryan says that debt reduction is one of those things, quote, I wish we could have gotten done. Ryan, the man with the single most power over the federal budget in recent years, sounds like a bystander, as if he watched laws happen rather than made them happen. To understand the irony and duplicity of the statement, you need to understand Ryan's career. After the profligacy of the George W. Bush years and the rise of the Tea Party, isn't that interesting? The Tea Party is a reaction to George W. Bush. Anyway, Ryan rocketed to the top ranks of his party by warning that mounting deficits under President Obama threatened the most predictable economic crisis we have ever had in this country. Absent the fiscal responsibility that would accompany Republican rule, we were facing nothing less than, quote, the end of the American dream. Ryan's reputation was built on the back of his budgets, draconian documents that gutted social spending, privatized Medicare, and showed that the Republican Party had embraced the kinds of hard fiscal choices that Bush had sloughed off. Even here, he's doing Republican work for them. You know, they're hard fiscal choices, and they're heroes in some fashion for proposing them. I admit in recent years, Republicans abandoned these principles. Ryan wrote in the book Young Guns, the 2010 GOP manifesto he co-authored with Representative Kevin McCarthy, who, despite knowing that Trump was getting paid by Russia, has fully embraced him, and Eric Cantor, who's a goner. We lost the true path and suffered electoral defeats, but we have not returned from this experience empty-handed. What Republicans had returned with, according to Ryan, was a willingness to make hard choices. It's time politicians in Washington stop patronizing the American people as if they were children, he wrote. It's time we stop deferring tough decisions and promising fiscal fantasies. For this, Ryan was feted in Washington society. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget gave him a Fiskey Award. Isn't that such a clever name? A Fiskey, for fiscal stuff. Fiskey Award. For budget bravery. He was a member of the Simpson-Bowles Commission, you know, the cat food commission, which he ultimately voted against because of his courage. He became Mitt Romney's vice presidential candidate. His reputation was so towering that when John Boehner stepped down as Speaker, he told Ryan, "You've got to do this job." I, Ezra says, was among the reporters who took Ryan's reboot seriously. To move us to surpluses, I wrote of his 2010 proposal, as if it would have done that. Ryan's budget proposes reforms that are nothing short of violent. Medicare is privatized. Seniors get a voucher to buy private insurance, and the voucher's growth is far slower than the expected growth of healthcare costs. Medicaid is also privatized. The employer tax exclusion is fully eliminated, replaced by a tax credit that grows more slowly than medical costs. I didn't agree with Ryan's policies, but at least, this is not a great excuse, but at least he was making the trade-offs of his vision clear. Here was a Republican who said what he was going to do, who admitted his health care plan included rationing, who offered something specific to argue with. That was progress. Boy, in the debating society sort of way, I guess it was. But to critics like the New York Times' Paul Krugman, Ryan was an obvious con man, weaponizing the deficit, as had been done before, so it was easy to recognize for Paul and maybe not so much for Ezra, who's younger. Weaponizing the deficit to hamstring Obama's presidency, weaken the recovery, and snooker Beltway centrists eager to champion a reasonable-seeming Republican, even though everything he just said was that things he was proposing were unreasonable. Ryan, after all, had voted for Bush's deficits. He was a yes on the tax cuts, on the wars, on Medicare Part D. He proposed a Social Security privatization scheme so pricey that even the Bush administration dismissed it as irresponsible. And his budgets for all the hard choices didn't actually add up. They included massive tax cuts with underestimated costs and unspecified financing, which is what led Krugman to call him a charlatan back in 2010. Ryan waved this away as nitpicking. If needed, his office said, adjustments can be easily made to the specified rates to hit the revenue targets. But his critics predicted he would lose his appetite for hard choices the moment his party returned to power. He hadn't changed. He had merely rebranded. The numbers proved them right. Ryan was elected Speaker of the House on October 29, 2015. Over the next 3 years, annual deficits increased by almost 80%. The added debt is Ryan's legacy, not his circumstance. It is entirely attributable to policy choices he made. To Ryan's supporters, this is unfair. Being Speaker of the House is the most Faustian job in history. Arthur Brooks, president of the Conservative American Enterprise Institute, told me he's done the best he can under these circumstances. Because he did one thing but didn't do another, to say he never cared about the first thing is to misunderstand the choices and to commit ad hominem arguments. I think that's too kind. As Speaker, Ryan had tremendous power. He could have, for instance, brought immigration compromises to the floor, but enforced congressional pay-go rules to bar any bills that increased the deficit from coming to a vote. Instead, he refused to bring immigration compromises to the floor while personally shepherding bills that betrayed the ideas that won him power. We are the choices we make, and Ryan made his. And it goes on to, in some detail, discuss Ryan's 3 betrayals. And if you were interested in the specifics of them, you could, of course, take a look at that. But I think the more important thing is, of course, I don't know, you're late to the party, but hooray, you now recognize that he was a fraud, and that's of some importance. Now, I will bounce off of the comment from AEI to jump to a couple of other things here. Being the Speaker of the House is, as he said, the most Faustian job in history. Done the best he can under the circumstances. Because he did one thing and didn't do another. To say he never cared about the first thing is to misunderstand the choices. I just want to bounce from that to what perhaps a seemingly unrelated, small, short story that I can throw out there. I just happened to see this one this morning and found it rather remarkable. Penny Nance, who I think named the other day for something else equally dumb, I think. She is the CEO of Concerned Women of America, which is a conservative, front group for Republicans. And this morning, she tweets, along with, her story in USA Today. Her tweet says, "Does Nancy Pelosi stand for victims of sexual harassment or not? Don't shield creepy congressmen." I'm in agreement with all of this, as most people are. Right? They should pay restitution to the taxpayers, for their hush money. And we're talking here about people like Blake Farenthold and others in the past. And yeah, there are some Democrats among those ranks too. And we should absolutely hold them to account. But check this out, the USA Today article that she writes. Headlined, "If Nancy Pelosi doesn't punish past congressional sexual abuse, she'll lose credibility." Just wanted to make sure that you got that headline. And goes on from here. Congressman, reporting here, Congressman used a hush fund to pay off sexual abuse accusers. We know about that. If incoming Speaker Nancy Pelosi doesn't out them, she'll damage her speakership. Just wanted you to know that a Democratic woman, once again, is in charge of cleaning up the mess left behind by Republican men, says this concerned woman of America. So Penny Nance, she's not supposed to be working in concert with whatever his name is from the AEI, Arthur Brooks. But remember, we just heard a second ago, well, when it comes to Paul Ryan, the fact that he did one thing and didn't do another isn't to say that he never cared about that thing or that he's ineffective or that he's a failure. Oh, but the subject is Nancy Pelosi. Well, Penny Nance, another Republican operative, and AEI chairman is likely to be a Republican operative and very little else. Don't forget about that. Wants you to know that if Nancy Pelosi doesn't punish Republicans who were let off the hook, then she's a failure and she'll lose credibility. P.S. If she attempts to punish Republicans who were failures and were let off the hook, or who were, misbehaving in some way and were let off the hook by Republicans, like, say, Donald Trump, by actually doing something about the guy or even initiating impeachment proceedings. Not that she's given any hint that she's actually willing to talk about that. But if she were to do anything, or even conducting her investigations, as she's said Democrats will be doing when they take power in the House, that will, of course, be horrific. And she'll be a failure if she does pursue them. Anyway, just more double standard stuff. Not a surprise to any of you. And then that'll give us the opportunity to throw in another double standard also having to do with A, a Democratic woman, and B, Paul Ryan. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, noting in a piece here noted in The Hill, although where the initial reporting was, I have no idea. Oh, but it's playing off of Ezra Klein's piece. There we go. How appropriate then. I didn't even realize that was the case. Good. Fine. Fantastic. That makes me feel a lot better about connecting them. Headline, Ocasio-Cortez says, Paul Ryan got called a genius, quote, genius, when he was elected at 28. Sound familiar? I get accused of being a fraud. Good point. Representative-elect Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on Monday compared herself to Speaker Paul Ryan, saying that the outgoing congressman was considered a genius when he was elected at 28, while she's been viewed as a fraud. Double standards are Paul Ryan being elected at 28 and immediately being given the benefit of his ill-considered policies considered genius, and me winning a primary at 28 to be immediately treated with suspicion and scrutinized, down to my clothing, of being a fraud, Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, linking to an article from Vox editor-at-large Ezra Klein entitled Paul Ryan's Long Con. Good point. That may be all there really is to it. All we really need to review of it. Good. Short, succinct, and to the point. Well done there. Absolutely true. All right. Other issues that require attention today. Let's see. I've got a couple more notes from Armando, so let me go and see what those things are about. Another tweet here. Let's open it up and take a look at it and heat the laptop up a little bit more. Nancy Pelosi is telling House Dems, says John Bresnahan of Politico. Nancy Pelosi is telling House Dems that she and Schumer will offer Trump passage of 6 appropriations bills and a year-long continuing resolution. Oh, it says he's meditating. On, I guess, DHS, the Department of Homeland Security. If Trump doesn't go for that, year-long CR on everything. Not going to support any border wall funding. Okay. That is of interest to know. He's got a follow-up comment here. Trump has no idea what any of that means, of course, and that's probably true. Maybe worth reminding people what a CR is for budget purposes. It's coming up today. All right. Well, there would be two separate CRs, I think, that we're talking about. Right now, I think they're looking at a CR that, like, kicks the can down the road for a couple more weeks. Continuing resolution, of course, a budget, not a budget gimmick, but a budget tool, a legislative vehicle that basically wraps up all of the as yet incomplete appropriations bills that in the ordinary course of things keeps the government running. And basically, usually a CR is just, let's continue to fund the as yet unfunded departments at the levels at which they were being funded by the last successfully passed budget, and just let it ride for now. So it's a white flag saying we give up on trying to revamp policy or spending levels, and we're just simply going to say we're not going to be able to get to an agreement and put something on the president's desk in time before time runs out and the government partially closes as a result of our failure to reach a real agreement, and instead just say whatever we were spending already last time we agreed on something, let's continue spending that for X number of days, weeks, months, whatever you want to designate, and then try again. So I guess what they're saying here, what the deal on the table is, Pelosi telling House Dems that she and Schumer will offer Trump passage of 6 appropriations bills, and there are normally 12. They correspond roughly to the various cabinet departments, though some bills combine 2 and some have just 1 but have some other independent agencies that aren't cabinet level thrown in there. So 6 of the 12, it will depend which ones they want. And a year-long CR either from DHS or on DHS. So I guess Homeland Security's appropriations bill, they're just saying, yeah, that's not going to happen because we're going to continue to disagree over border wall funding. If that's a fundamental issue for you, and that's the only one you understand, so it's going to be fundamental, we're not going to give you that. So basically, this is a declaration that she and Schumer together now say, yeah, Democrats won't cooperate in giving you border wall funding. Not going to support any border wall funding is what Bresnahan's comment says at the tweet says at the end. So here's the deal. In order to avoid more government shutdown drama, if that's what you want to do, it's not what Trump wants to do. Trump loves shutdown drama, but Democrats are saying that's disruptive to people. So here, we'll tell you up front. There are 6 appropriations bills we think we can probably get done. The other 6 are going to be controversial, and you might try to plant border wall funding probably in more than just the DHS bill. Maybe the 6 are other bills where there would be likely to be able to plant border wall funding and say, we'll just say CR for the rest of them. At least for a year, we're willing to say, spend what you're spending now and all those departments. We'll wrangle with you over the other 6 appropriations bills where we think we can come to agreement. But these 6 will just say, status quo. Are you up for that? Keeping in mind, status quo is the product of the last year or so of Republican presidency and Republican majorities in both houses of Congress. So it is something of a concession, though it's also a concession to the reality that Democrats in the House alone are not going to be able to change spending priorities over the objections of Republicans in the Senate and a Republican president. You can have what you've been having on this half of the budget. On this other half of the budget, we'll even negotiate with you a little bit. So you can totally avoid shutdown drama and have everything that you've been having under complete Republican control for the last 2 years. An objection to that from Trump, which will come because it doesn't have border wall funding in it, basically sets him up to say, yes, I and I alone am saying I would rather shut down the government than admit that I can't fund this stupid wall, which Mexico was supposed to pay for and never did and never will. So it'll make, the tantrum is on him. I don't know if everybody's going to understand it that way. Trump certainly won't understand it that way. And he'll do his best to portray it in the opposite light. We'll see whether that works. But that's where we stand. We'll be back after the next 2-minute break. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's see. Okay, direction to go next. Geez, there's a lot. Okay, I keep complaining about this. Can I do a lightning round of some things here and then get into some other thing, or should I just plan for, there's a lot to do. All right, one thing I'll have to put off here. Check. All right, next. Lots of discussion, by the way. The ongoing turmoil in the White House. I guess I'll at least note for the record, if not actually read the story from Phil Rucker in the Washington Post here, and much talked about, a lot of excerpts from this, much talked about, so we'll have to go over the entirety of the article, but perhaps later in the week. There was no plan B. Trump scrambles to find chief of staff after top candidate turns him down. Lots of reporting in there, and since then, on, the basic fact that Donald Trump can't find anybody to take this stupid chief of staff job. We're on now not only to considering idiots like Rick Santorum or even Rick Perry, which is an amazing thing. I've never seen so much intra-cabinet reshuffling before. But also, I guess, Chris Christie back in the running, which is an amazing thing all by itself. And, just another illustration of how ridiculously capricious Donald Trump is. I love Rex Tillerson, he's the best. I hate Rex Tillerson, he's the worst. I hate Chris Christie, he's the worst. I love Chris Christie, he's the best. It's amazing. But, all right, well, that's no surprise to anyone. Anyway, that's out there. Also of much interest, some follow-up over at Daily Kos on the story of the workers at the Trump New Jersey golf compound who came forward and said, yeah, I've been working there the whole time as undocumented, and they knew I was undocumented, and they even had to go out of their way to make sure that I could get to work because they knew I couldn't get a driver's license. They ran a shuttle to pick me up. This is a new development in that story. Gabe Ortiz writing it up for the front page. Yesterday, Trump workers' attorney says false documents were provided by someone in the Trump organization, which is not Donald Trump necessarily, but the Trump organization, a different entity separate from Donald Trump, of course. But how do you like that? Not only did they transport her back and forth, he must have been really happy with the way she took care of his private residence there, which is an amazing thing all by itself. And really a fine, crystalline example of gimmitarianism. Throw all the immigrants out of the country except this one makes my bed just the way I like it. And I don't want to bring in anybody new because then they're going to find out something, or they're not going to be able to do the job quite right or whatever. I doubt very much that he would admit that it's really fully about, she's such a good worker. She does such a great job personally that I can't have anyone else, but rather, she hasn't spilled the beans on me in the past, and I don't want to start with somebody new that I'm going to have to explain to them once again that I don't want anybody to find out in the newspapers about what you find in my private residence. I don't know what's driving it, but the more surprising part of it, of course, is not only that, he's such a big hypocrite because he employs undocumented workers. That we've known for a long time. Specifically about that, not to mention the fact that he's a hypocrite. But on top of all of that, imagine getting false documents for them. Oh my God, voter ID, something, blah, blah, blah. Again, now we know, once again, it's all projection. It's once again, this is why he and other Republicans think it's absolutely the case that Democrats or whoever their enemy of the day is are doing all these horrible things. And the reason is because I'm doing them, so somebody else must be doing them too. Just another great example of it. And also a great example of gimmitarianism. I don't care what I say. I want what I want. Just give me it. This is the person I want working here. And it doesn't matter what I say about the broader issues. So shut up and leave me alone. How's that? Okay. Let's see. Another very interesting short-ish take on a story. Brian Beutler making a good point again. This time via Twitter. Talking about, let's see, he's got another tweet embedded here, which I guess I'll take a look at. Is he the author of this piece? A Wired.com piece by, let me just make sure I got all this stuff correct here. Natasha Tiku. So I guess no. But at any rate, a piece in Wired entitled Leaked Audio Reveals Google's Efforts to Woo Conservatives. Now that piece was tweeted around here by Scott Thurm from where? Wired. Okay, the business editor of Wired, with this pull quote from it. One of the directives we've gotten very clearly from Sundar is to build deeper relationships with conservatives, Google's head of U.S. public policy to angry staffers in March after the company sponsored a conservative political gathering, illustrated by a doofus in a double-breasted pinstripe blue, like electric blue almost, suit. Oh dear, there goes my laptop. That's bad news. That blanked out on me entirely. It's not quite the blue screen of death here, but it's damn near. Well, I'm not sure how we're going to deal with that. I'll have to go over to the computer that runs all of the sound effects and the tech aspects of the show and open up Pocket over there and read off of there. Dang, that's disappointing. I hope that recovers soon because it's also my main cue for all the other sound effects. Anyway, at least we can get on to the story here. I'll go back to it. Brian Beutler describing Scott Thurm's description of Natasha Tiku's piece here in Wired. Wow. But as I said, a guy in the blue pinstripe. Ooh, I've just rebooted. I didn't even do that. It did it itself. My goodness. Leaked audio revealing Google's efforts to woo conservatives. It's a guy in the stupid pinstripe suit and a MAGA hat. And the pull quote in the Wired tweet here, we recognize that the company is generally seen as liberal by policymakers, a government relations executive told Google employees in February. Scott Thurm has that pull quote, and then finally back to what Brian Beutler had to say about it. A close look at why tech giants yield to bad faith accusations of political bias by conservatives, that's what this article is, reveals it's not just or even mainly about public perception. It's about making extortion payments in pursuit of far more lucrative policy concessions. I think a semi-obvious point, but one that needed to be restated, and a good view of it from Brian. So it's not just that places like Google are going out of their way to placate bad faith complaints from Republicans about political bias. Google is biased against conservatives. Wikipedia biased against conservatives. YouTube biased against conservatives. Twitter, whatever they're complaining about today. It's not just about trying to alter public perception, but it's about making an implicit threat to these companies that we will punish you, and we've been laying the groundwork publicly to punish you with our bad faith accusations of political bias. However, you can buy your way out of that punishment by giving us a tremendous amount of money and supporting our political activity instead. Good point. Well worth making. Moving on from that, what to offer you for the last segment here. This one I think I will save. Here's another quick hit. We can try and do this one for our overseas friends. I thought this was an interesting one. Hugo Rifkind, with whom I am not familiar, though he, in his Twitter bio, calls himself now officially the funniest journalist in Britain, and that must be nice. A Brexit observation, which I thought was a good one, and I saw someone pass on into my Twitter feed, and an interesting perspective. I say a good one, by which I mean clearly not, well, you'll see what we're getting at. Hugo Rifkin, remember he's a funny guy, says this: the thing is, the best way to understand Theresa May's predicament is to imagine that 52% of Britain, I guess the Brexit vote numbers, had voted that the government should build a submarine out of cheese. Sounds ridiculous, right? Well, that's because it is, right? Now, Theresa May was initially against building a submarine out of cheese, you see, obviously, but because it's a completely insane thing to do. However, in order to become prime minister, she had to pretend that she thought building a submarine out of cheese was fine and could totally work. Cheese means cheese, she told us all madly. Then she actually built one. It's crap. It's not the word he uses for it. It's the S word. It's crap. Of course it is. For God's sake, are you stupid? It's a submarine built out of cheese. So now, having built a crap cheese submarine, she has to put up with both Labour and Tory Brexiters insisting that a less crap cheese submarine could have been built. They're all lying and they know it. So does everybody else. We've covered this already. I know, but it's cheese and it's a submarine. How good could it possibly be? Only she can't call them out on this because she has spent the past 2 years also lying by pretending she really could build a decent submarine out of cheese. So that's where we are. On balance, he says, I think this analogy works fine, except perhaps for the submarine and the cheese parts, which need a little work. And that's it. Although, very interesting, someone very earnestly, I guess, tries to point out that, well, no, this isn't a good observation. Who's this? James Thompson, who also has a blue check mark here, bills himself as psychologist, commentator, and daydreamer. And he says, so is it your contention that this is it's impossible for a country to leave the European Union? Hugo responds, is it your contention that it's impossible to build a submarine out of cheese? You said, he began the whole thing by saying, here follows a Brexit thread. My question to you stands. Hugo responds, I feel that if you answer my question, then the answer to your own question will become clear. So they're going around in circles here, but I think equally good observation made further on down, although now the thread has grown so long that it becomes difficult to find it here. Brian Neff responding, I love this, except I feel a cheese submarine does not quite convey the costs and danger a cheese submarine poses to the entire nation. A cheese submarine doesn't sound terribly expensive and just a mild waste, not economic collapse. And here, the connection for how this thing made it into our stream here, Ray Radlin, who I follow, and I think a lot of you probably do also, and puts it this way. Yes, but if you put the entire nation in that cheese submarine and set off in it, I think the danger is adequately represented. And I think that ties things up nicely. And I'm glad that you gave us that summation of things. All right, looks like the laptop has rebooted, but it hasn't sufficiently recovered in order to switch in between other stories that I wanted to bring you in tabs that were open there. So I'm going to have to guess as to what those things were and proceed as if I remembered what they were. Let's see if there's any chance any of them will open on their own. Yes, one of them, as a matter of fact, Zach Fink, a reporter, Where? Well, Zach Fink News. That doesn't tell me anything. NewYork1.com. That makes more sense. A full list of committee chairs for the incoming Democratic State Senate majority, for those of you interested in the outcome of turning over control of the New York State Senate to Democrats, actual Democrats this time. So some of you may want to check in on that one. It won't mean as much to our national audience, but close watchers of the New York State Senate will be very interested in finding out about that. Let's see. Other items that we have open. I think we actually covered most of the tabs that were open. Let's see. What else do we want to run through before closing out the show for today that we think we can actually get through? Let's see. Let's try this one. We'll head back to the NRA issues and throw those in there. Let's see. Where are we? The Washington Post. Okay. They were making the point that one of our commenters was brought up earlier on about how Butina might be able to spill the beans on the NRA, and that would be of particular interest to us, and that's true. Let's see. Oh, and Mark Hogue, Thorgama, reminding us, I'm late on this, but Russian spies who have disappointing performance evaluations get live cremation, so no shallow grave needed for anybody involved there, whether Butina or others. So good news, except if you're selling shovels to the Russians, I suppose. Let's see. But yeah, other comments on these. Are these both tweets that I have here? Let's see. We have the tweet of Zeddy, Zedari, whose avatar I do see fly by quite a bit on my Twitter feed. In light of Butina's likely plea to being a Russian spy. Here we go. The videotape of here's the time in July of 2015. Trump called on her and she asked a question about sanctions, and he said he'd probably lift them. And it's worth having that handy so you can see that. Now, my recollection was that his answer wasn't particularly good. And although in the write-up we saw earlier, he gave a very extensive answer, but he really was very evasive. I don't think I can risk playing the tape here, though, but maybe I will include it for you for your own review. And let's see. The other item of interest on the subject, a tweet from Zev Shalev. What does he have here? Let's see. EP, executive producer, CBC's The Weekly, which I'm not familiar with, but a reporter or a producer nonetheless of some importance here. This is incredibly significant, he says, and spells trouble for Donald Trump, the NRA, and the National Interest magazine, as well as, who else is he listing here? The Center for the National Interest. Oh, yes, we know about them. The prospect of the entire NRA being caught up in a Russian laundromat to fix an election is very real. And it starts off by just including the news of someone else's tweet about the Butina plea deal. He goes on to explain himself this way. Butina was in contact with members of the Washington think tank considered to be a Kremlin proxy in D.C. I wrote about the National Interest and the Center for the National Interest in his attached tweet, or attached story, I guess, how Henry Kissinger brokered the deal between Trump and Putin with Jared Kushner's involvement and the other scandal this reminds us of. I suppose we might as well just open that up and see if that intrigues us enough to spend time on. Worth recalling, he continues, Butina's testimony will give the FBI conspiracy evidence going back to 2011, which should make people like Donald Trump, Sheriff Clark, you remember that guy, David Clark, and J.D. Gordon nervous, as we first detailed below. in another piece that he wrote for his outlet called Narrative, how a Russian central banker and suspected mob boss infiltrated the NRA and helped get Donald Trump elected. Continuing on his thoughts here, and there's this from Christopher Steele. Remember him? Butina was involved in Rex Tillerson's selection as Secretary of State over Mitt Romney. Wow. If she testifies Russia controlled U.S. foreign policy under Donald Trump, you can't get more serious than that. My goodness, I don't think I was aware of that. Here is a pull quote here. I guess this is the quote from Christopher Steele. I don't know where the quote was carried, but the official said that he was merely relaying talk circulating in the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but what he'd heard was astonishing. People were saying that the Kremlin had intervened to block Trump's initial choice for Secretary of State, Mitt Romney. The memo said that the Kremlin, through unspecified channels, had asked Trump to appoint someone who would be prepared to lift Ukraine-related sanctions and who would cooperate on security issues of interest to Russia, such as the conflict in Syria. If what the source heard was true, then a foreign power was exercising pivotal influence over U.S. foreign policy and an incoming president. That does sound rather intriguing, doesn't it? Let's see. So which of the various tangents is the most interesting? Is it the Kissinger piece? Henry Kissinger played a significant role in getting Donald Trump elected with Russian help, and it's not the first time he betrayed his country for a presidential nominee? Or are we more interested in For Guns and Country? How a Russian central banker and suspected mob boss infiltrated the NRA and helped get Donald Trump elected. I think that would be the story of Torsion, who's now retired / gone missing in Russia with Butina's arrest. All right, well, we're not going to be able to get through either of those in their entirety, but I guess we'll just, I'm glad we noted Zev's tweet thread here, and we'll leave it up to you to decide if you want to read the accompanying materials on your own or whether we discuss them in upcoming shows. And I guess maybe what we'll do here at this point is throw in one more tweet thread, which should set us up, well, won't set it, I don't know, we'll see whether we discuss this tomorrow. Tomorrow will be a very busy day, of course, with Greg and Joan on hand, but maybe we'll carry this over into Thursday just to connect one or two other stories that we mentioned and didn't get to with some of the stories we did spend time on today. Anna Massoglia, I'm guessing, is that the pronunciation of her name? Researcher at Open Secrets DC, who passes this thread on. Here's a nugget about televangelist Pat Robertson that didn't make it into our deep dive about alleged Russian spy Maria Butina, NRA leader David Keene, Jack Abramoff, and GOP operative Paul Erickson, talking about an Open Secrets post focusing on the, I guess, or prompted by the Butina plea deal. And I'm sure that's an amazing read all by itself, but here's the nugget that didn't make it in there because it sounds kind of intriguing and one-off. FARA records, the Foreign Agent Registration Act, was that what that was for? You remember? The one that's not Section 951. FARA records revealed that David Keene, Jack Abramoff, whose name we haven't heard in a while, and Paul Erickson, lobbying together, had a note about Pat Robertson freelancing, claiming we have no knowledge of what he may do next. What the F is this about? So why was a televangelist advocating for a dictator accused of human rights violations is the big question here. And this is that comes from a fax cover sheet from Paul Erickson's office in 1995. In case you were wondering why a fax was being used. Yeah, 1995. Not to belabor the obvious, but let me assure you that none of the individuals involved here in Washington in trying to secure is trying to secure a visa for President, is trying to secure a visa for President Mobutu of Zaire, have any contact with Mr. Robertson or any knowledge of what he may do next. This being shared among people who were, in fact, lobbying for Mobutu. 95. Well, Pat Robertson's Operation Blessing. So lovely. Anna reports here. Operation Blessing had planes that were transporting, interestingly enough, what would they be doing? The story was that they were helping aid refugees from Rwanda. What they were actually doing, as it turns out, Pat Robertson's Operation Blessing planes were transporting diamond mining equipment for the African Development Corporation, a Robertson-owned venture initiated with the cooperation of Mobutu. Mobutu Sese Seko, the Congolese dictator who paid for lobbying to seek entry into the U.S. And what could go wrong, really, with American investment in Central African diamond mining, right? Because there's nothing wrong or dirty about that. Virginia's Consumer Affairs Office, Virginia, the state, found that Pat Robertson, quote, willfully induced contributions from the public through the use of misleading statements, unquote, secretly using funds for cargo planes to aid refugees from Rwanda to transport diamond mining equipment for his business venture. How weird is that? Now, that's Pat Robertson, not Jerry Falwell, the other Virginia-based televangelist wacko, also strangely tied up in activities in which he should not have been, and which is all coming to light all at the same time as we take apart the Trump-Russia world and Russia-NRA world. How weird is all of that? Well, okay, it's pretty weird, I can tell you that. And we won't even get to Open Secrets reporting about what Jack Abramoff, among others, had to do with the NRA thing. I can't believe that guy managed to worm his way back into things only to find his way into yet another scandal. Except, of course, I can believe that because that's what he does for a living, is operate in scandalous areas and does so scandalously because he's just a dirtbag and you can't take the dirt out of the dirtbag, I guess, is basically what we learned here. Okay. Wow. Well, I don't think we're going to get to too much else here today. Things winding down here on our time together here today, but we'll be back tomorrow, of course, with Greg Dworkin and hopefully Joan McCarter. It's been a while, so it would be nice to catch up on that. Plus, of course, I have at least 2 stories which listeners to the show have suggested we spend some time on. One several days ago, and it's about time that we catch up with what the F is going on in France, particularly in Paris, and the riots, if you want to term them as such, and what's behind all of this and how is it happening. And I will be glad to catch up on some of that if we get a chance. Plus, of course, something that Paula Apanese has sent on to us that comes from a diary over at Daily Kos, which means it's extremely important. I guess since we were throwing televangelists in there, we could sort of stop in on the religion question for just a moment and I guess chime in on the bad news. I guess not terribly unexpected given, I don't know what, the state of the world today, that it turns out that child abuse, not limited in any sense, and nobody ever really thought it was limited to the Catholic Church, although the Catholic Church had a terrible problem with it and did for some time and covered it up for some time. And I guess it probably should have occurred to you that child abuse is probably rampant everywhere, and there's probably other organized religions that will run into problems with cover-ups about it, and they have, and this time it's the Baptist Church, although not nearly as monolithic an entity by design as the Catholic Church is, but do want to stop in on that story at some point in the future. And if we can't hold ourselves to it, you should be aware of it and know that we made a valiant effort of it, and we wanted to spend some time on it, and you can do it on your own as well. Now I have to switch over to the alternative computer in order to get you some information about the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next here on Netroots Radio. We can even get to some of the information he wants to pass on here. Let's see. Trump was super pissed when Nick Ayers jumped ship, and you know what happens when he gets super pissed. On the rest of the menu, Trump campaign's Hispanic outreach staffer ordered to pay $25,000 for violating her non-disclosure agreement when she sued for racial discrimination. 32 leaders of churches, mosques, synagogues, and indigenous communities arrested by riot police at the border fence
from Daily Kos Radio
in San Diego.
NetrootsRadio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
More bad news. 2 separate people planning mass killings in Toledo, Ohio, until federal authorities manage to stop them. That's the good part of it. And then the chef's table section, where Ryan Zinke used Thanksgiving to sneak a Koch advisor and a party loyalist to be in charge of FOIA requests to the Interior Department. That and much more next.